When the developers made Vanilla World of Warcraft, it truly was during a different time for gaming. There was less thinking about min-maxing and a long-term plan, and just a group of guys making stuff that they thought was fun. And for the majority of the features within Vanilla, they absolutely got it right. Then again, there are a few features in the game, or missing features should I say, which have gone on to be a bit more noticeable the longer that we've played this game. With Classic Plus expected to be announced during BlizzCon this September, I thought it would be good to get a little bit ahead of things and go over a few base features in Vanilla which I think could probably use another look at. So these will either be minor additions to the game or baseline features to Vanilla which really haven't stood the test of time, as well as some other things. So with that said, let's make a start. So I want to start off with an addition which probably is about as non-controversial as you can get for adding something completely new to the vanilla world, and that would be to note the lack of guild banks within the game. So originally these didn't arrive until patch 2.3 in TBC, but they just gave people organizing guilds a much easier and more convenient way to sort out the guild's materials, enchanting items, consumables, all that kind of stuff. On regular vanilla as it is at the moment, instead of a guild bank, you'll just have the main officers and guild leaders have an alt that controls all these kinds of items, but a guild bank would make it more accessible and convenient without, I think, really losing anything from the game either. And if they were to add a guild bank, it's one of those things where I'd just say, yeah, okay, nice, that makes sense, sure, why not? Another thing I think could use changes is something which, to be honest, has already been changed, and I'm sure this will be in for Classic Plus, and those are updates to the baseline user interface. So I don't know if you've played on a vanilla 1.12 client in a very long time. The chances are that you have not played on a 1.12 client, and let me tell you, you probably do not want to play on a 1.12 client. I know not everyone will like all the updates to the baseline UI, especially since Blizzard have been pushing a lot of them recently, but it is better than the alternative. It's also worth a note that just recently Blizzard did increase the nameplate distance on Classic Era from 20 yards up to 41 yards. So if you're playing, you know, a hunter or something, you can actually see what you're shooting at now. That's a pretty novel change. It is a little bit odd we've had the 20-yard nameplate for, you know, 7 years and then it just randomly changes out the blue. I'm assuming this was done on purpose, but we didn't really get a blue post about it either. Nevertheless, I think I'm generally in favor of them doing updates to the UI. Before we continue, I want to do a quick mention to today's sponsor, boot.dev, and watch out during this integration because I've got a special discount code that'll be perfect for getting started. If you're a gamer who's ever wondered about making the jump into coding, boot.dev is the ideal first step for that. They'll take you from beginner to expert in Python through a hands-on RPG-like experience where things are kept really interesting and engaging. So they've made learning into a game, and you can make that game into a career. It's learning driven by what makes games so repeatable and engaging. You earn experience, unlock achievements, complete quests, and fight bosses, all while you're learning coding skills to forge a whole new career. It's literally leveling up in real life. You'll also earn items that work like power-ups to help solve difficult situations, and random chest drops will give you items such as consumables to help when you're stuck. It's like finding a rare spawn out in the open world in WoW, and the approach Boot has with its hands-on learning is really the way to do this. You're constantly writing your own code throughout the curriculum, not just watching somebody else do it, and in my experience you learn so much faster when you're doing things for yourself. You can also search up challenges too if you really want to hone in on a particular area that you feel needs more work. There are pre-made challenges, or you can describe what you want to work on and Boot will generate a task just for you to perform. So everything you need is there, you just need to make a start today. You can use the link in the description with my code Willie to get 30% off your entire first year for boot.dev. As always, thank you to Boot for supporting the channel. Let's get on back to WoW. Another addition which I think we will more than likely see in Classic Plus will be some kind of dual specialization. Now Blizzard have been pushing dual spec in all kinds of different versions of Classic for quite a long time now. Initially it was brought into Season of Discovery in an earlier phase, and then after it was popular there, it's also been rolled out to Classic Era as well as the Anniversary realms, and every time dual spec is brought into the game it seems to be overwhelmingly positive. I do wonder if eventually people will ask, well, why do we stop at dual spec? We have 3 specs each, why can't things be more flexible? And I think there will be a conversation around that in due course, but for the time being, dual spec I think is another addition to the game which really doesn't do too much harm for how impactful it is. And number 7 is a technical feature from back in the day which I just don't think has much of a place in the modern game, and that is the debuff limit. You know, back in original vanilla you could only have 8 debuffs applied to any target at one time, and that was later increased to 16 when Zul'Gurub came out. And when you have a raid of 40 players, players all randomly pressing their buttons, that cap could be hit super fast. That's why when Classic re-released, you would have certain classes assigned to do debuffs, and those debuffs would be the ones which are only the most beneficial for the entire raid, such as Sunder Armor, Fairy Fire, Curse of Recklessness, all those kind of things. Now this was a technical limitation back in the day, and I don't think it's really stood the test of time very well. That being said, Blizzard have removed the debuff cap in the past before in a standard vanilla setting. They did it during the Season of Mastery, and I can tell you it did not make any difference whatsoever to which classes can DPS well. Warriors were still the best by a mile. The likes of Boomkins and Shadow Priests don't suck because they can't use Moonfire or Shadow Word Pain. They suck because they just do no damage whatsoever. Still though, I think there could be future design space for making damage over time effects more powerful, and if the debuff cap was gone, then it would allow for those classes to press their buttons without being shouted at by their guildmaster. Another thing I think is definitely worth talking about when it comes to raiding or group content is 40-player raids. The idea of 40 people storming into Molten Core together is an incredible spectacle and a core part of what made vanilla feel so great and chaotic. I remember playing Classic during 2019, and getting to the raid was often more entertaining than the actual raid. Part of that reason was also we didn't have the Chronoboom Displacer for world buffs either then, so you had to really move as a group and try and avoid other guilds when you were getting into the raid. Though I will say, as fun as it was for a while, I eventually moved off a PvP server because having to do gymnastics to get into every single raid every single week became incredibly tedious, and I can tell you it is not something I would want to do long term. I'm getting sidetracked by world buffs here, but yeah, you're not going to be surprised when I talk about them later. But all the same, I highly doubt Blizzard sticks with the rigidity of the 40-player raid format in Classic Plus. I've mentioned it before, but the compromise they could do is really just sitting in front of them because they have already done it. So in Season of Discovery, when Blizzard released Molten Core, they were designing it for 20 players, but on the first reset, people found out you could bring between 20 and 40 players, effectively allowing players to decide how many people they wanted to bring to the raid. Now Blizzard saw this and they dialed back on it and nerfed it so you could only bring 20 players, and then they got a lot of feedback saying, hey, actually we like this, we could decide how many people we want to bring, we didn't have to leave anyone out, so then Blizzard increased it again. However, moving forward, they only designed raiding content for 20 players, such as the Scarlet Enclave being balanced around 20 players, even though when it first launched it was super difficult and it was a challenge to complete with 40. This gives Blizzard the opportunity to design raids and make them a little bit more difficult when you're bringing 20 players, but as a raid group you don't have to leave anyone out, and if the raid is more challenging then you can just bring more people and you will get over it. Also, if you're a more tryhard guild bringing less players, you're kind of getting rewarded too because the amount of loot drops is larger compared to the number of players you're bringing, whereas the opposite is true for larger raid groups. Either way, I think it meets the demands of both groups of players, and it does technically keep 40-player raiding alive, though if I'm being honest, I highly doubt it will be too popular moving forwards if we are given this flexibility. And number 5 is something else which I think has to be touched on launch for Classic Plus, and those are some changes to the baseline classes that need the most help. Now I do think things should move slowly so not to overwhelm everyone with a barrage of changes instantly, but I think if it just feels like we're playing standard vanilla again where warriors absolutely dominate everyone, mages can solo dungeons easily or gold farm or the likes of that, people aren't going to feel the plus aspect of the game. It's just going to feel like another Classic fresh, and I know a lot of people, even really die-hard vanilla enthusiasts, are getting kind of burned out of just playing another fresh. I'm sure by this point in time everyone has a pretty good idea of which classes are good and which classes are not so good in vanilla, particularly the hybrid classes would tend to need more help. I'll also be interested to see what route Blizzard goes down in terms of making every spec feel viable and wanted. They don't have to be within a few percent numbers of each other's DPS, but viability is just I can bring this spec along and it will actually be fine for my raid group, not I bring this spec along and they're practically a cheerleader we're doing a charity case for by bringing. I do also kind of hope they don't go down the TBC route for doing this, where we only have group-wide buffs, and the way you're supposed to build your groups is super rigid if you want to actually do well. For me, I think the Wrath of the Lich King version, where you had a bunch of classes who all had the same buff, and they were all raid-wide, did end up working much better. And of course, some guilds will only bring the class that does the buff the best whilst doing the most damage or being the most tanky, but this is completely unavoidable. It's just not really worth worrying about because it cannot be stopped. All the same though, moderate class tuning at launch has to be a must. Next is probably one of my least favorite areas of Vanilla World of Warcraft, and I can say that with a good deal of confidence because I practically never interact with it, and that's the auction house. So be honest, do you use the auction house without an add-on? Or another way of putting it, when was the last time you used the auction house without an add-on? For me, I genuinely don't know when that was. If I don't have Auctionator or something of the likes installed, I practically just don't even use the thing. Simply put, the way the auction house is organized is just not good. It invites people to get scammed by listing things as lowest bid with a really high buyout. Only people who are being dishonest benefit from this, so what's the point of that being in the game? And the interface when you're posting a lot of items is just kind of, well, bad, for a lack of a better term. I am not sure whether I'd want Blizzard to go all the way and put the modern version of the auction house in the game, which existed in Dragonflight. That's also a Mists of Pandaria, by the way, but if they did, being honest with myself, I never even look at the classic auction house UI anyway. Am I missing out on something if I willingly never use it in the first place? I mean, it's hard to say that I would be. And with the Dragonflight or MOP auction house, it's not just that it looks different, it functions differently. So instead of you, for example, buying a 20 stack of cloth and that's it, you just buy that 20 off that one auction, you could buy a 30 stack of cloth and it will buy that 30 for whatever price you put in, instead of you needing to manually go and buy across multiple different auctions. It probably is a better system, but again, I don't know if people would want it. Let me know what you think about that. The final three are the main ones which I think do need some consideration for Classic Plus, and number 3 is the balance of professions. So if you played Vanilla for any length of time, you've leveled up engineering. If you played Vanilla a lot, you've leveled up engineering multiple times across multiple different characters, because it is the best profession in the game, and it's just not an argument. It is absolutely. You have all the various fun items such as mortar, reflectors, rocket boots, mind control cap. You have sapper charges, you have other nades, you have target dummies. The list of things you get from this one profession just goes on and on and on. And it's not the case I'd like engineering to be nerfed. I think it's great and a lot of fun, but the other professions do need to be brought up a notch in one way or another. Maybe they could just be more useful for making items at an early level. Maybe they do need more for fun kind of gadgets or extra items attached to them. Maybe there could be some more benefit to your personal performance. Though saying that, I really don't want Blizzard to go down the route that they did in TBC or later Wrath, where every single profession just gives you X amount of stat, and it's balanced because it all gives you the same number. I suppose it makes sense, but it's just not very exciting. Again, much like class balancing, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it definitely could be in a better place than it is right now. And the number 2 spot is everyone's favorite thing to love to hate, world buffs in raiding content. Again, as I started off with, when Blizzard were making Vanilla, it was just a bunch of guys doing fun stuff. Hey look, you killed Onyxia, we're gonna hang our head outside of Stormwind or Orgrimmar, and everyone gets this buff to celebrate. It was never meant to be something you take inside of raiding content every single week. Yes, it's fun to do, but it's just dumb. I do think we are lucky to have received the Chronoboon Displacer, so at least getting world buffs is less of a nightmare, but even still I think people are just coping when they say it doesn't take long to get them or they're really not that bad. It's not just the getting them that's always been the problem about world buffs for me. When you're in the raid, it makes dying during the raid so demoralizing. Literally, you could die on a first pull in Naxxramas on a warrior. You feel like your raid night's over, don't you? You know what I'm talking about. This is meant to be the for fun, casual, easy version of the game. Again, you don't need world buffs, but when you have them, they make things so much more enjoyable, despite all the annoyances that go into getting them. And I think even in Season of Discovery, when Blizzard put world buffs on consumables, that doesn't necessarily fix the problem either. It just creates this thing which you need to have all of the time instead. And then they went to balance the Scarlet Enclave around you needing world buffs, and they had to reduce the price of buying them at the same time, by the way. It's like Blizzard keep chipping away at how annoying they are to get because they know it sucks, without just wanting to remove them outright. It could be because in Season of Mastery they did remove world buffs from raids, and that season was not very popular, but I think that's a bit of a scapegoat reason, and the season just came too soon after Vanilla, and it was mid-tier 5 in TBC, which was really popular back then. But yeah, world buffs, let them be something for the open world. Keep them in dungeon content too. I don't think anyone's going to get too mad about that. But world buffs in raids, I really think they've had their time, and for Classic Plus, I hope we don't see them anymore. And that brings me to the system, which I think is absolutely in the most dire need of changes before launch. Blizzard has to make a decision on this one. the whole PvP ranking system. Without exaggeration, it is the worst PvP system and ranking system I have seen in a game ever. I've done a video of all the various ways people min-max this system, and genuinely watching it back, it's hard to believe just how many different things you can do. I mean, usually min-maxing and getting the most out of something can be interesting, but in this case, it just involves so much degeneracy. The people who do the best from the ranking system are the ones that just spend the most time doing it. And most bizarrely, when you're ranking up, you're not actually fighting versus the other faction, you're fighting versus whoever is the sweatiest player on your faction for their ranking place. That being said though, I think the competitive edge in gaming has grown absolutely massively since Vanilla in 2004, and that if players were given some kind of rank to actually prove how good they were at PvP, it would be popular. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Arena either. Maybe there could be Arena one day, but I think baseline Battlegrounds and the ranking system really need thinking through before they go down that route. But based on how confusing the ranking system is and how outdated it feels, I really reckon it has to be the #1 thing Blizzard must take a look at. So those are 10 features which either exist in Vanilla, or I don't think would cause too much controversy if they were introduced. What do you reckon though? What for you does Blizzard have to take a look at for Classic Plus? Thank you again to boot.dev for supporting the channel. You can view all their content for free via the links below, so give it a look and see if back-end development is for you. And, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.